Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to teach you how to color grade any video in any style from any camera. Doesn't matter if it's log or not, I'll teach you both. If you guys need to find something specific and you came to this video for one reason in particular, you can go to the timestamps in the description and hopefully something there will be closely related to what you're looking for, or you can scribble along the timeline itself and you can see where the timestamps really are. Now, over the past few years, I've spent a lot of time color grading videos. Obviously through this channel and multiple other reasons, I spend a lot of time color grading, so I feel like I have a pretty good idea of how to color grade quite well. I hope. People tell me I do anyways. But more importantly, over the past year and a half, I've learned to teach the subject. Which practices I think are good, which ones I think are bad, and then kind of how to streamline the whole process. I think I've gotten a pretty good grip on how to share that. So my goal by the end of this video is that you're going to be able to learn and understand color grading both practically and conceptually, meaning you'll understand how color works and why it works, and then also how you can actually apply those, that knowledge to your video when you're color grading the actual process of that as well. Now, we're gonna spend more time on the process than we are gonna be on the conceptual, thought process behind it, but it will be touched on, so just stick around for that. We're gonna be working in Premiere Pro. I know a lot of you might love DaVinci and want to use DaVinci, and I will be making a video on that soon, I hope. But there will be one in the future, so stick around, subscribe if you're new, if you haven't been here before, and check back in when that video might be out. But if you're here and you're using Premiere Pro, this is the video for you. So we're gonna hop over here into an old timeline of mine from a couple of videos back, and I have on the screen some shots that are in what we call log footage, log format. Now, here's the deal. If you didn't shoot your video in log, it doesn't look like this, right? It looks normally saturated, maybe perhaps like this, and it overall doesn't look bad. It just, obviously you want to color grade it and make it look better. Skip ahead to what you see on the screen right here, the timestamp on the screen. I don't know what time that's gonna be yet, but that'll be for like standard Rec 709 footage, just coloring and changing some stuff, right? If you have shot in log and you need to convert it to Rec 709 and do a lot of other stuff, then stick around here. We're gonna go right into how to edit log footage now. That being said, here on the screen, again, we have log footage. This is another shot in log once again, different lighting, which is why I have two different shots there. And this is a different shot, which is pretty similar lighting, but I just wanted to bring in another one just as a backup. And then we're gonna start from the first one, right? So this first one, I'm outside. We know it's supposed to be bright and sunny. You can tell that the sky's being blown out because there's some light, right? But the problem is it's in log. Now, we need to get it out of log and into Rec 709, which is your standard, viewing profile on mobile and digital stuff. We won't get too detailed into that, but the point I'm making is we need to convert this footage to a watchable format. How do we do that? Now, there's two ways that I do it in Premiere. It really depends on what workflow I'm going for. Well, let's say I have a lot of footage, right? And I do have a lot of footage for this scene. So I can go ahead and, let's say I know all this footage is shot in the same format, which is log cinema gamut C-log3. Again, if you don't know what cinema gamut and color space your footage is shot in, check your camera settings for one, and then two, look it up online. If you have I have a Canon R6. If you shoot on a Canon R6, figure out how to put it in log, and then you can choose what color space and everything else you want. And that's gonna be important right here. So we'll go ahead and just click, let's just say this first clip right here. Scroll all the way to the bottom because I know that all this footage I wanna convert out of log into Rec 709. Select it all, right click it, go to modify, and then hover over color. And now you'll see color settings, input LUT, I'll move my mouse. We want to convert this from its log cinema gamut form to Rec 709, and the way we do that is with a conversion LUT, at least in this case. Alternatively, if you didn't want to select all this, let's just say you have one shot, you can go over here to basic correction, drop this down, and on input LUT, it's the same exact place you would put this conversion LUT we're about to throw on here, but you do it on an individual basis. I just have a lot of footage, so I'm doing it all at once by modifying the footage. So again, right click, modify, color, and we're back here. Now, under input LUT, if I press my drop down here, you'll see that I already have one here. You might not have anything, or yours might say browse, for instance. I don't remember what it says, but yours won't say what mine says because assumptuously you haven't already thrown an input LUT in here before. If that's the case, press add LUTs. Now it will pop up with your Finder or your Windows Explorer, whatever you're using, and you have to go find the LUT that you downloaded for your camera. Now again, like I said, you wanna make sure that you're putting the correct conversion LUT on your footage. So you want to find a Rec 709 conversion LUT for the camera and the color space that you're shooting in. Again, I'm shooting on a Canon R6, right, in cinema gamut C-log3 or Canon log 3. You could be on Sony. There's a variety of other options, but the point is, make sure you find a conversion LUT for your camera specifically. If not, Google it. It's a pretty simple find. What do we do now? So again, go to none, go to add LUTs. You want to find out wherever you put this LUT. But I have this conversion LUT folder right here because I've just, again, downloaded a bunch of different LUTs over the years for different cameras. And this is the conversion LUT I'm going to go ahead and use. Press open, and it will drop it in that, right? That was also alternatively what I already had down here. And then press OK. Right, so I'll undo this, and you can see what we had, which is the log. Now, when we convert it, right, it looks pretty normal. You can actually get away with just using that because it looks pretty good and my lighting was nice. But let's say your shot has really poor lighting or you underexposed or something went wrong, right? And it doesn't look perfect, it looks okay. But there's a lot more that could be done. So in order to do those things, right, we need to correct the color, or in this case, the section of the video is the color correction section. I hate that rhymes. Anyways, we're gonna go ahead and actually correct the color now. So if you're over here, right, in your editing tab or whatever tab you're already editing in, go to the color tab, wherever that is, and this is what you'll be graded with, right? This is the Lumetri color panel. Under basic correction is where you're gonna start for your correction of this, video again. And you wanna take a look and identify what's going on in your shot. Now, again, like I said, I lost details in the highlights because the sun was blowing out the background. There's a little less saturation and contrast than I want, and I think my skin tones look a little bit red, and I don't want that. Just a little bit too much. Needs to be some red, but I think they're a little bit more on the pink side, and I wanted to bring back maybe more towards the warmer reds, if you would. So I identified what I need to do to correct this footage in my eye. Again, no expert. I did this off of what I feel is right because I want to enjoy what I did. That's my goal here. So I'm gonna go ahead immediately and just take my highlights and bring them down. And now, okay, you can bring them down. That's a little too far down, right? Yes, we lost some details that we will never get back in the sky, but we don't want to bring it down this much to where there's no life in the shot. So let's bring those up to like halfway. I'll bring the whites up a little bit too, because the white point of the video overall is like the brightness level. It's not the exposure, but it's like the brightness and whiteness of the color. Again, it's a hard thing to explain in words, but you'll start to figure this out as you go about your color grading journey, if you would. Another contrast, I'd like to add a bit more. So I'm going to bring my contrast slider up a bit, bring the black points down, and then bring my shadows down a bit more too. And if you want to see where you started to where you are now, come up here and turn off the bypass or turn it on alternatively. And that's where we started. This is where we are now. So a little less contrast here, more evenly contrasted in my opinion here. And then of course we want to go ahead and set the white balance if the white balance is wrong. Now this white balance is pretty okay, but let's say yours is bad and you happen to have something white in the scene. Now I'm wearing a white shirt here. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the pick tool, choose the white shirt and see what happens. Okay, so you see that it says 2.9 and 2, or -2 now. The white balance is pretty good. It is set to auto and it's pretty decent, but it got corrected ever so slightly because I chose what is known as true white, or whatever I had closest to true white. And now the computer will be like, okay, this is what should be white. What color is it? Let's make it pure white, or whatever true white is to the computer. And then alternatively, it'll do that to all the color relative to the whiteness of the selection you made. If that didn't make sense, try it out in a couple different bits of footage in different environments and you'll start seeing what it does in a better way. I'm also gonna boost the saturation up a little bit, just maybe 109, call it a day. So, before, after, I like this shot. We're gonna call this done, just on the correction part. Now, the last thing we need to do is fix that redness skin tone that I spoke about. So I'm gonna zoom in on my face here, which is a terrible frame for me to do this in, and maybe I'll move it. We'll go to HSL secondary. Now this is hue, saturation, and luminance values is what HSL stands for. But we're gonna go ahead and do something called qualifying, or at least that's what DaVinci Resolve calls it, so that's what I've always called it. And we're going to pick out a color specifically from the footage that we want to target in any regard. Doesn't matter if we're gonna remove it or saturate it or whatever. We just wanna target a color out of this. So I go ahead and I'm picking that color. I'm gonna pick this right here. And nothing's changed so far because we haven't told it to do anything. But if you turn on the color gray thing, you'll notice that the red sections, the color I selected, of my face are now highlighted, if you would, or isolated. Now, again, hue, saturation, and luminance, we can control each of those values. The saturation of my face, right, it's quite saturated, but it's not too saturated, so it found a decent range of saturation that it was targeting here. Now, if I want to target a greater range, I'll just drag this up a bit, and it will grab more of the saturated values from a least saturated to a little bit more saturated section. Same with luminance. I'll bring this down to capture more of that values. And I'll turn this off because now I've made a selection that's pretty good, pretty covering. I don't want to overdo it. It's too easy to destroy footage and quality, and it's not overly red to the point where it's ruined. So again, be careful with it, but you can stretch things pretty far. I'm going to go back and fit this to my screen so you can see what it looks like as a whole. And down here, now that we've selected our color, we can even minimize this for the sake of simplicity. Now that we've selected the color we want, and we know that that red section is selected, we can go ahead down here and just change that red to whatever color we want. So the opposite of red and pink, right, that magenta color, is like this greenish blue. So we know that in order to, and if you don't know, color can be removed from other color by using the inverse or the opposite side of the spectrum. In my case, like I said, pinkish red, so we can go over here to green, and you ever drag this ever so slightly towards the greenish blue, and you'll start seeing, especially when I do the comparison in a second here to show you the difference. I'll zoom in. If I turn this off, you'll see the overall red splotchiness turn a bit greener, just a tiny bit, because again, I don't want to over affect this. It's not that bad, and I'm just doing this for the sake of showing you guys how it can work and what you can do, and you can also play with some other settings here. But I've gone ahead and changed the actual redness value, the intensity, the harshness of the red, and brought it back down by adding green to the mix. It's like painting or anything else that works with color. We're not going to get any more into it. We could do more, but we're not going to. It's a little bit more on the complicated side of color grading, and I don't want to overcomplicate the process here. Now, we can go ahead and do this 2 more times on different footage, right? So we'll do this very quick now. On this shot right here, what's the problem? Well, I'm a little bit blown out. I have a little bit less saturation and contrast than I want. Again, it's kind of the same situation as the last one. It might just be my personal preference, but I like to add some saturation. I'm going to start this time by just selecting a white wall, knowing that that is white. I've painted. And all it did was add a little bit more warmth to the temperature because it needed it apparently. Now I'm going to bring the highlights down just a tiny bit. We're going to bring the contrast up. I'm going to bring those whites back up a little bit, just the white point a tiny bit. Black point down a bit, and we'll raise the shadows a tiny bit and the exposure. Now again, understanding what each of these tools do is helpful, but really the best way to learn is by just playing with the settings and seeing what each one does based off your own footage, so you can really get an idea. Now, a lot of them do what they sound like. Highlights, change the highlights. Shadows, change the shadows. Contrast, change how contrasty the actual footage looks. Exposure, literally exposes or underexposes the footage. And then the black and white points is how dark the darks are and how white the whites are, right? Those are the simplest ways to explain it. White balance, right? You have temperature, tint, and saturation. It's the temperature, tint, and saturation of the color white or the white point of the footage. That's a rougher definition, but again, playing with it and doing your own thing while you sit here and try to figure it out is where I find it to be most helpful. Now, alternatively, you could also go to your curves panel, which I didn't touch in the last shot because I didn't need to, but this is another place you can add saturation and contrast. So right here under curves, right, RGB curves, we're only gonna mess with this one for this situation. You could mess with a lot more of these, and there are some videos on the channel where I do. So feel free to watch like this one. I think I messed with it a little bit and I explained it. But again, shadows, highlights, whites, darks, midtones, right? So you have your blacks, your whites, and your midtones. Now they're not labeled, but the left corner, the bottom left is dark shadow blacks. Top right is whites, highlights, right? And then the center, these like 4 squares here, is like our midtone range, right? Between black and white. Now, what we can go ahead and do is just add a very, very simple thing called an S-curve, which is just clicking 2 points on the chart. And then we'll just make an S shape, which is the most standard curve shape, in video editing that most people tend to use. It's gonna bring our black point down a little bit. We're gonna bring the white point up a little bit too. So now before and after, right? Now it's a lot more punchy and contrasty. Personally, I don't like this look. So you can just double click anywhere in that area and it will reset all of the points. But you can also do the same with any of the color because of course red, green, blue are the 3 colors used in pixels, which makes white. That's a whole other story here. But you can go ahead and change all these things on the curves panel if you want to. Honestly, I'm happy with that shot. It looks fine to me because we haven't color graded yet. We've only corrected. And then the same here, right? If I go really, really quick, contrast needs to be up a little bit. Need to raise the exposure, set the white balance. Actually bring the highlights up this time, bring the shadows down this time, white point down this time, and black's up this time, right? That's before, this is after. I mean, there's a lot more I could do, of course, but for the most part, it's pretty okay. White balance is set, before, after, both are fine and acceptable. So now let's go ahead and actually color grade the shot or the whole entire sequence, because let's say we have all three, and in this case, these clips were together in the same video. We have all this footage, right, on this, let's say this old timeline here. All this footage needs to be put together. You can see that I have a thing called an adjustment layer above all that footage. If I turn that off, you'll see that this is the original shot, and then there's like visuals that have been changed on this whole layer. Now, the reason for that is because if you want to affect a bunch of layers at once in Premiere Pro, you need to do it on a layer that kind of sits on top of it. That's just like an empty layer where any effects can be applied and you won't affect individual clips. And what I mean by that, we're gonna get into right now in the color grading section of this video. So over here in my project panel, I'll right click, I'll go to new item, right? And I'll find adjustment layer. Again, all it is a layer to make adjustments. It's literally what it sounds like. I'll go ahead and click and drag it on top of my footage, stretch it to the length just so it covers all of it, and you can cut this thing and move it wherever you want, doesn't matter. But it works the same as any other layer. It will have whatever you affect and put on it, and then you can edit and do whatever you want with it, also resize it, all that junk. For the sake of this video, we're going to decide what color and style should be applied for the tone of this video, because now it comes to the time where it's more of a creative, subjective choice here rather than objective, changes that are needed. This is where it comes down to understanding what color does and then what type of tone you're trying to deliver out of your video. Now, I won't go into all of it, but for the sake of things, right, a few examples. If you have red, like this scene right here, if I was shooting this and I had this red overtone, which probably doesn't look good because I didn't shoot for that in mind, it's going to feel maybe more angry or more like scary, harsh, if you would. Where if I had this nice warmth, this yellows and oranges, right, it's going to be probably warmer and a little more gentle. And then blue might be cold and literally frigid, like snowy, if you've ever seen a movie where they're outside, it's snowing and it's nighttime. It's like maybe the color rating, if you start looking at it, is more on the blue side of things, because again, color helps the audience depict emotion and feeling. So using color to your advantage in not only your lighting, but your color grading is going to help your audience connect with your piece more. I'm gonna keep it that simple. I can go a lot more into it, but for the sake of this video, and my videos specifically here, right? I'm inside, it's a pretty casual standard day. I'm having a good time. I was excited to be building all this stuff and tell a story. So I'm going to go with more of a yellow tone, which is a lot of times why my videos end up looking like that, because I'm not going for something super serious. So we're gonna stick to that by coming over here to our color wheels and match. We're gonna start there, and you'll see that shadows, midtones, highlights, we've seen those terms a lot, now are able to be controlled on their color. The color of the midtones, the color of the highlights and shadows, right? I wanna bring my shadows towards blue. Now it sounds opposite of what I just said, which is about warm, but we're gonna balance this out here in a second and you'll see how this works, because again, blue is the opposite of yellow or orange, that region. It's technically orange, but you get the point. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna bring the shadows down just a bit more into the blues, just a tiny bit. We don't wanna overdo it, but we're gonna bring them down. Now, if you don't see a difference yet, right, let me turn this off. This is before, this is after. So immediately this blueness is starting to feel maybe like it's cold outside or something like that. Now, there's not a lot of blue, so it's not gonna give you that feeling probably, but if you're thinking about it and then you look at it, you'll see the blue and you'll be like, okay, maybe it's a little bit darker of a story he's telling or something more intense. And if you really wanna see it, right, I could maybe put it like that. Now, it's not a good look, but I could. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'll just double tap in the center of the circle, it'll reset it. Bring the midtones up towards the reddish orange direction. Not 100%, but that direction. And then the highlights, I'm gonna do the same thing ever so slightly towards the yellow. And I'm cool with that. Now what I did was I added blue to the shadows, so that when I brought up the midtones into the yellow, it kind of brought the shadows more towards green than like purple. And that's only because it's a preference of mine. I like that. Green is closer to yellow. So I still get like a contrastiness in the shadows from the highlights and the exposure while I move the camera here. But I balanced it out by bringing up my midtones. So before and after, before and after. I like what we have here, but we're not done. We're not done. So we can go ahead to our creative tab now. And you may have been sitting at this looking like, what's that tab do this whole time? Well, here you can add LUTs, which are lookup tables, which are like predetermined color grades that you can just drag and drop onto your footage. Now, it doesn't always look good. I'm not a fan of LUTs. I'll never sell you a LUT probably unless I really enjoyed the LUT I made, but I highly doubt it. But if you want to, you can go ahead and use a bunch of pre-made LUTs. Like there we go, that's a LUT that adds, it's called Blue Ice. I don't even know who made it. Adobe, I guess, or someone else. But I'm going to go ahead and fade the film. I want to make the whole footage a little bit less contrasty as a whole, but not, individual parameters. Again, that's before. This is after. Look at the shirt. You'll see more detail in the shirt than you do before. I'm also going to sharpen the footage just a tiny bit, maybe like 9. Make it a bit more vibrant. Again, turn it off. We'll see what we had before, and now we have this. I'm actually going to bring the faded film off because it's not really looking right for that shot. And then shadow tint and highlight tint, it's just the color of the highlights or the shadows. It's pretty self-explanatory. However, I don't touch this much. You can change it all around. I just don't do much. So let's say we do that, and that's fine. Turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, right? There's a little bit more design to it, a little bit more whatever. And then as a whole, if I come to this shot now, you'll see that if I turn off the adjustment layer completely, that's before, this is after. That affects the adjustments that we just made looking at this shot in particular, right? We want to check to make sure they look good on the rest of the footage. I think that looks okay. As a whole, it might be a little more green than I want. So I'll bring the highlights maybe a bit towards the reds a bit, and I'll bring the shadows out of that a tiny bit. And maybe that's fine. Again, I'm not going to go off my preference as much as just to show you how each element works. This is what the adjustment layer does. That's the color grade, and we have the actual color correction. So if I turn everything off, right, we converted, and this is what we're starting with. Then we correct, right? And the exposure is correct, the saturation, everything looks good. And then we're going to grade by turning this adjustment layer back on. And now there's design, there's style to it. I wouldn't go with this grade particularly for this shot, but anything you want to do, you can do by changing the adjustment layer. I can make, that shot look like that. And there we go. Let's say I like that for something. I don't, but let's say I do. That will now change and affect the other shots that are underneath this adjustment layer. If I don't want it on that shot, I'll just drag the adjustment layer off. And you can see that now it only affects this shot and that shot and maybe whatever else comes afterwards. So that's how you color grade, color correct, and color convert in Premiere Pro on your videos. Really quickly, just to end this nicely for those of you who don't shoot and vlog, we're gonna come over here to this shot, a very old shot from a very old video on this channel where I shot in Rec 709 on this camera. That means no log, I didn't convert the footage. This is just the footage the way it came out of the camera. You will notice that it's very, very saturated, very contrasty, and honestly, the exposure is not great. But this is what I have to work with. So what can I do to this, again, to improve it? If you just jump to the point in the video here and you're now watching, I went over all the details about what these mean earlier in the video, but for the sake of it, I'm just gonna show you what I would do with this shot. Now, this shot, right, the shadows, a lot of details being lost. The whites are okay. It's a little more saturated than I think it should be, and the white balance feels a little bit off, just as some starting points. So we're gonna start with the white balance, and now I know that this table is white, so I'll click it, and this is the white balance it gave me. This is what it set it up to. Personally, this is my rule. If the white balance correction doesn't look good to me, change it. Make it look good to your eye, because I just used the white on my hat, and that looks a hell of a lot nicer than what the other thing was, and that's original. This is the white balance corrected. So again, play around with it till you find what you like and what you think is good. Use your own discretion to trust yourself a bit. Now, again, it's a little dark, so let's bring the exposure up, 0.2, 0.3 at most. Highlights, we'll bring those up a little bit too. Contrast, there's too much contrast for me in this image, so I'm gonna bring the contrast down. I don't always bring it down, but in this case I'm going to. Shadows, I'll bring up a little bit to get some shadows back on my shirt. Whites, I'll bring up a little bit, and then blacks I'll bring down until I lose a little bit of detail, but not too much, just to give it, some contrast. And I'll play around, and I'll go back and forth. We started with this, we now have this. This is a lot more watchable, in my opinion, compared to what we started with. Now, as I went over earlier, you can go to the curves panel and play with your saturation and contrast a lot more. I'm going to see what happens. I'll bring up the whole shot. I don't like that. I'll bring down the shot. Maybe I'm going for that moodier office aesthetic vibe. It's not my preference, but it is some people's. I'll bring the midtones up. That's what I made a point here for. And the highlights are brought down. And this is what I started with. This is what I have now. Let's say I like, again, that moody aesthetic. Cool. And then that adjustment layer, we just went over the adjustment layer. That's how you color grade like a Rec 709 footage, right? It's just by eye. There's no technicality to it really. I'm gonna copy this by holding Alt and just drag the adjustment layer on top of it. And now that adjustment layer with the color grade we did a minute ago is now affecting this one and anything else it goes on top of. So it doesn't matter if you have Rec 709 or log footage, the adjustment layer in the color grading section is done the same way. Do it on an adjustment layer, color grade there, and then if you ever want to, you can just delete it and you get back your footage and everything's perfectly fine. So that is how, or at least that's how I color grade in Premiere Pro. My entire process, start to finish, it's very, very simple. You can always add other effects and visuals on top of this, and I do add other effects and visuals, which you can download on my Gumroad store here if you want to grab some of my stuff. But I would put those on the adjustment layer, so I don't affect that original footage, but I get, you know, more style to it. So that is how you color convert, color correct, and then color grade anything from any camera in Premiere Pro. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Leave a comment about what a future video you want to see, and tune back in next time. I'm posting a lot more these days. I try to. It's a new year, 2025. Welcome. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks for watching. Good night. Hope this helped. That only took an hour. Yeah.